you guys send out recordings. Oh, there we go. But given that there were people that signed up that maybe couldn't make it today, I'm happy to have the replay be sent out. That's totally fine. Cool.
Perfect. That's
Well,
what I
we're
like to
just
do. Yeah, is just have that available because we know things come up, especially when you're parenting young children. So
yeah, for sure. And I'm fine with it being sent out. Cool. So I think we're just gonna jump right in. I'm hoping to talk for maybe 30 minutes or so, but have time for Q&A at the end. And then, like I mentioned, I also would love for it to be interactive. So if you have a question or a comment, or you want me to stop and pause, I don't mind being interrupted. So just cut me off and we'll have it be more conversational. All right. So you're in the right place if you're wanting to learn more about common behavior challenges in young kids. I just mentioned I specialize in working with kids 2 to 7, and that's because kids in this age range have very unique needs, and there are tools that are specific to this range that have been shown to be effective. We'll talk about why challenging behaviors tend to happen in these early years. And then we'll get to my favorite part, which is also why I'm sure you're here, is to learn about these research-backed tantrum prevention tools to support long-term emotional growth and development. And this is just because I really believe that addressing and supporting your child with their tough behaviors and their tantrums is about long-term success, not so much quick fixes in the moment. So you've probably already tried scripts and quick tips, and you've learned from experience that they're not always effective. Or they might work temporarily in the moment, but maybe you feel like it's not really helping either of you in the long run. So supporting healthy behavioral and emotional development is a process, and that is something that happens over time. And we're going to talk about how to do that at this age in early childhood. If you guys don't already know, I'm Amy. I help positive parents understand their young, spirited children and give you effective tools so that you don't have power struggles and tantrums running the household. That's what I'm passionate in working with. I'm a licensed psychologist here in Michigan. I own a private practice called Atlas Psychology. And I'm certified in parent-child interaction therapy. So if you're not familiar with that therapeutic approach, I love to pull tools from that specific program into my work with parents. So we'll be talking a lot about those research-backed tips today. I have my PhD in school psychology from Michigan State. And I just put this here. This is my niece, Maddie. She's 15 months. She's already so full of personality. I was just at home in California spending about 2 weeks with her. And a lot of the strategies that I'll be sharing with you today were really effective in helping her take her very first steps. So that was really very exciting for me. And I just wanted to share that with you guys. Okay, so let's talk about common behavior challenges in young children. So early childhood is an exciting time that's full of rapid developmental changes, lots of growth. Kids are learning things very quickly, which can be fun, but it also comes with its behavioral challenges. So there's a lot of behaviors that we could talk about. I'm sure that we could tell stories for days about things that our kids are doing at home that are tough and tricky. But in general, when parents think about challenging behaviors and when we're talking about challenging behaviors, they tend to be grouped in these 3 main categories. So we've got things with like issues with compliance. So this is anything from like dawdling or lingering, not listening right away, or flat out saying no and disobeying the house rules. We've also sometimes have issues with aggression. This is pretty self-explanatory. It's things like hitting, kicking, scratching, biting, throwing toys, or breaking toys. And then we've got this third category, which we consider to be tantrum-like behavior. So anything like whining, crying, screaming, and yelling. And we'll talk about all 3 of these today. I hear a cute little one there in the background. Okay, why do such challenging behaviors emerge in the early years? So I like to start here because understanding why your child is acting out is truly the first most important step before we talk about how to address it. It's really the starting point that we need to discuss in order to know how to improve a behavior. So one of the most common reasons that parents come to work with me, or one of the most common questions that I get, usually has to do with like, how do I de-escalate a tantrum? How do I stop this tantrum from even happening? And I get that, because tantrums are very triggering and they can be very stressful for us as parents and our nervous system. So I get that the goal often is to prevent a tantrum from even happening in the first place. But this is also a very important question. Once we understand what's the driver behind the tantrum, or what might be the underlying cause behind a tantrum, we can then select the most appropriate strategies to help address it. If we don't understand the reason behind a tantrum first, we won't be able to select the right strategy to address it and to support our child's development in the long run. And then, as we just talked about, and as I already mentioned, there's a big difference between disciplining in the short term and quieting a tantrum in the short term versus knowing how to approach it in a way that truly supports your child's emotional needs and their behavior. So I just wanted to point this out. Obviously, there's biological reasons and social emotional reasons that might be behind a tantrum. Has anyone ever had an adult tantrum when you're tired or when there's lack of sleep? So that's important to keep in mind. Some kids are, the same goes for kids, right? They're tired, they're hungry, they're more likely to be upset or be irritable and have a tantrum, just like us. Some kids are born with a more difficult temperament, so I just wanted to acknowledge that. And then sometimes kids have neurological and developmental differences that might be explaining the difficulties day to day and their differences in operating. There might be some sensory overwhelm going on. So I just wanted to point that out, that I acknowledge that's happening in some cases. And in those cases, we would address those behavioral challenges a little bit differently and specifically as needed. Same thing for like when there's a social emotional need. When kids are scared or when they're frustrated, they express their stress in much different ways than adults do. So they tend to be more angry. They might become upset. And sometimes adults do that too. So these kinds of needs we would address specifically. We would address them in a more individualized manner. But today we're going to be talking about more general and common reasons for early childhood behavioral challenges. Okay, so let's start from the very beginning, which is birth, the brain, and development. It's important to point out that at birth, the brain is 25% of its adult weight at birth, and then there's rapid development going on at this time. By the time kids are 2, their brains are about 75% to 85% of full weight and full development. So the brain is rapidly developing in the early years. Most of the brain lobes are developed when kids are young, but the very front one, and it's this light blue area in the front of the brain, we call that the frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe is still developing well into adolescence and even when individuals reach their early 20s. The reason that I'm pointing this out is because this area of the brain is what is responsible for things like emotion control, impulse control, emotion regulation. Here it says attention, planning, and decision making. So when we think about the parts of our brain that are responsible for things like keeping our hands to ourselves when we're angry, that's impulse control. Being able to express our emotions, that's like the emotional control and regulation, right? So, and waiting, being patient, waiting for what we're asking for. These are all things that kids are still working on, and that the part of their brain is literally still developing. So it takes time, it takes patience. We want to recognize where kids are at in their development when we address behaviors that can come up that might be related to these parts of the brain. And then there's language development. So babies communicate by crying. Some toddlers also do, but that when they're born, that's how they communicate. They're not yet able to talk. We have to remember that babies who can't talk, their most effective way to communicate is to cry. That's how they get their needs met. As young kids learn to talk, language often develops very quickly. So they start with one word, they start to put sentences together. By the time they're in toddlerhood, they can express their own needs and wants. So you might be hearing things around the house like, I'll do it myself, or mama, I do it, right? No, I don't want that yet. No, not that one. I'm not ready. So they're able to express these things. But at the same time, they're still developing fluency, especially emotional communication. And this is a skill that even adults struggle with sometimes. So being able to express how we feel is something that can take a little bit longer. And I just wanted us to keep that in mind. Emotional communication is often the last skill to develop. Young kids who are still developing this fluency might then resort to other means to communicate. So they might cry like they did when they were babies. They might whine, which tells us that they're getting to that point of frustration, or they might yell. This is also tantrums are a way of communicating what they cannot yet express. And then there's the development of independence, right? In early childhood, kids are starting to learn and they're starting to gain independence. By age 2, kids learn that they're separate from others, meaning their parents. They learn that they're their own individual being. As they start to learn independence, this can be really exciting. And it's something that as parents, we also teach and prioritize in a lot of ways. So we're helping kids learn to walk on their own. We're teaching them potty training. They're learning other daily living skills like feeding and dressing. So there's this emphasis on being independent. But at the same time, kids are still very reliant on parents and adults to support them. So it's this dichotomy between becoming independent versus the lack of control and decision making in their day to day that can sometimes cause frustration and then a manifestation of inappropriate and challenging behaviors. I wanted to credit this and I couldn't find the source, but there's this diary of a 2-year-old that has been going around online and on social media. I don't know if you guys have seen this before, but I think it's so powerful. So I just wanted to put this here. It was written by an adult from a perspective of a child, though. And so this 2-year-old hypothetically is saying, today I woke up, I wanted to get dressed by myself, but I was told, no, we don't have time. Let me do it. I wanted to feed myself for breakfast. I was told, no, you're too messy. Let me do it. Right? I wanted to get in the car and walk on my own, but I was told, no, we need to get going. We don't have time. We got to go in the car. Like, this made me cry. So it's the wanting to do things on their own. Sometimes the prioritization of wanting to facilitate that independence, but at the same time, sometimes doing it for them because it's just quicker and it's easier. So I won't read the whole thing. I just wanted to put this here on the slide because I think it beautifully illustrates this period of time where independence is developing and it's being taught. But at the same time, kids don't always have control over their own decision making, right? And then sometimes they can't. Sometimes kids are not yet able to make certain decisions that the adults need to make. And so there's this push and pull. And then lastly, obviously, you as a parent have enormous influence over your child's behavioral and emotional development at this time. Kids at this age are still very connected to their parents. They're still very attached to their parents, and they look to you for guidance. They seek your approval. Your feedback and your attention as a parent is the most powerful and influential thing at this age. It's a very unique time period, right? Where young kids are still very impacted by their parents' feedback and how you shape and teach behavior. Parents are more influential at this age than at any other point in a person's life. Like, we think about adolescence when peers start to play a role, or teachers, or people, or society as a whole. Like, parents at this point in time have such big influence over how children behave and how children develop. They're extremely motivated by your feedback and your attention, and even sometimes negative attention. So the key takeaway in reviewing all of that is just to say that kids are communicating through their behavior. Your child's behavior is communicative. They're communicating at a way that's consistent with their brain development. Like we talked about, they're communicating in a way that matches their verbal and their language skills at this age. And given the fact that they are wanting to test out and practice their independence at this age, we might be seeing kids behave in a way that's communicating a need, a want, their feelings or a physical feeling or a state. They're communicating in a way that they know how to, that's efficient for them, and in a way that's been effective for them in the past. I wanted to point out that what their behavior is not. So it's not personal. I know it can feel very easy to feel like you're not doing enough, or that you're failing, or that you're doing it wrong. But this is key. Like, your child's behavior is not an indication that you're not doing enough or that you're doing it wrong. It is oftentimes appropriate given their developmental level. And then I also wanted to say that kids are not being bad to be bad. Many kids don't like to act out. Most of the time they don't. There might be a mismatch between what's expected of them, what we're expecting them to do, and what they are able to do in the moment. Any questions so far? Are there any questions in the chat, Marnie?
Nope, no questions in the chat. I just wanted to reiterate, like, I love just that you bring up, like, they're not being bad to be bad.
Mhm.
And that when we're talking about those expectations versus what they're capable of doing, sometimes they are capable of doing it, but other times they're not going to be. And it often, what I remember, it felt really intentional. Like, I know you can do this because you've done it before. But like, in that moment, with all of those like little things that built up to that moment, that day they're not capable.
Right.
So it's
Yeah.
just really helpful to like remember, like, just because they can keep it together most of the time, like, doesn't mean the time when they're not keeping it together, they're doing it intentionally. It just means that like the things were not in place to set them up for success in that moment.
Yeah, that you bring up such an important point, and I love that you mentioned that, like, the context matters. So I think you're right. Sometimes they are capable, but like we just talked about, these are things that are still developing and that kids are still practicing. So it doesn't mean just because they're capable to do it in some situations and with certain factors in place, doesn't mean that they can do it yet independently across the board. So we really have to think about what's the context, what's going on, how full is their cup on that day, right? Our moods, even as adults, like, our tolerance and our patience for things tends to wax and wane depending on like what else is on our plate and other factors at play. So I think it's really important. I'm glad that you brought that up. Any other thoughts or questions? No? Okay. We'll keep going. Just a couple more slides till we get to the strategies, but I wanted to talk a little bit about, why do challenging behaviors persist? Because I often get the question, well, yes, this is, all commonplace for child development. So does that mean my child's going to just grow out of it? Once they hit a certain age, do these things just end? And it's not a simple answer, but I do want to talk about, sometimes challenging behaviors persist for lots of different reasons, and it has to do with interaction patterns that might be happening. So when we think about it, negative behaviors are, and when I say negative, I mean these challenging behaviors like tantrums, right, defiance or aggression. These are behaviors that are louder, they're more attention grabbing. We as adults tend to react faster when kids are displaying a challenging behavior. And this is totally natural, because why wouldn't we say stop or don't? But at the same time, this can actually reinforce the behavior without meaning to. So this is thinking about our development that we just talked about, this is a period of big emotions that kids are experiencing and some tough behaviors. But when we accidentally reinforce these, we can find ourselves caught in a pretty tricky power struggle that can, be pervasive. So this is a graphic that I had pulled from my Instagram. But I wanted to say, it's easy to fall into these interaction patterns. It's natural, but I'm here to help us break out of it. This is just illustrating an example where your child might be screaming or yelling to get something, and you try your best to hold your ground, you try your best not to give in, but eventually it just becomes so overwhelming that you give in to what they want. And what happens is your child has now learned that screaming and yelling is effective for them to get what they want. And then the cycle really only stops when you can no longer hold your ground and you give in, or when a parent might escalate to the point of getting a child to stop, meaning we might yell and then feel guilty about it, right? So there are ways we oftentimes find ourselves in this cycle, but there are ways to break out of it. So let's talk about that. What can we do? Let's talk about how to teach and increase more appropriate behaviors and facilitate our child's emotional development using more positive language and tools. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about from here on out has to do with tantrum prevention. Tantrum prevention is extremely powerful. It means we're being proactive. It means we're meeting a child's developmental needs that we just discussed, rather than waiting for the tantrum to happen. So rather than waiting for the tantrum to happen and then we intervene and react in the moment, we can focus on these tantrum prevention tools to teach from a more proactive and positive standpoint. There's so much that we can do before removing a privilege or before doing a timeout or before imposing another consequence that might be a punishment. And I just wanted to say that tantrum prevention strategies are going to be very different than the strategies you might use to de-escalate a tantrum in the moment. So that's key, right? I hear from a lot of parents that like, I've tried X, Y, and Z, nothing is working. And it doesn't mean that the skill isn't effective. It sometimes might have to do with when we're using the strategies at what moment in time. So tantrum prevention strategies, very different from in the moment tantrum strategies. Tantrum prevention is going to have a lot to do with understanding the triggers and where our child is at, and then meeting these two very, very important developmental needs that we just talked about. So the key is to fill these buckets. Children at this age have needs for positive attention from their parents, and they have needs for exerting their agency and their control in an age-appropriate way. So I'm going to teach you a way to fill these two buckets on a daily basis and keep them filled. This is the exact method that I teach to parents who come to work with me in my one-on-one therapy sessions. And the reason that we start here is really to meet these two important developmental needs. When these needs are met, kids are more likely to feel good. They're going to feel connected to you, and that sets them up to be more receptive to your directions. They might be a little bit more open to listening. So it's important that we lay the groundwork first. I call it special time. It's often that's usually the term that's used in different therapy programs for kids at this age. And it's basically 5 to 10 minutes of one-on-one time with your child. So there's a very unique and specific way to do it, which we'll go through. But it is what I like to call the 5-minute method to improving your parent-child relationship and your child's behavior. The reason that this is my favorite tantrum prevention strategy is because it's developmentally appropriate. Everything that we're going to be working on is play-based. And we know that kids at this age tend to learn more through play than they can do with logic and reason. We can teach and really shape a child's behavior through play-based learning. Special time is going to incorporate positive language and tools that we can use to support them in the long run, rather than quick fixes in the short term. The other reason I love this is because it's so quick and easy. Like almost anyone can do 5 to 10 minutes of one-on-one play with a child daily, and kids really love it. It's really easy to incorporate into your daily routine. Your child really enjoys it, and it's research-based. So I won't spend too much time on this slide. This is just another graphic that I pulled from my Instagram, but special time is very research-based. There's hundreds and hundreds of studies on special time and how effective it is for reducing challenging behaviors, reducing parenting stress, and improving your parent-child connection. This is just one case, but the reason that I wanted to show this one, and I collect data with every family that I work with, this is just one. The graph on the left here shows when this family started working with me, they were rating their child's behavior as more challenging than other kids of the same age. So the dotted line that's going across horizontally, that's what we consider to be typical behavior. These parents were rating their child's behavior as more challenging, which makes sense as to why they came to see me. In just 1 week of doing special time for 5 minutes a day, they saw their child's challenging behaviors drop to be below what we consider typical. So they saw great improvement in that child's behavior in the 1 week. And we also saw a big reduction in parenting stress. So the brown column is stress coming in to work with me. The black column was stress after 1 week of doing special time. So again, this is just one data point. There's lots of data out there. We're not going to go over it all, but the point of this slide is to tell you that these are data driven and they're research-based strategies. So let's talk about how to set it up, and then we'll talk about the specific tools to use during the 5 and 10 minute period. So the best way to do it is to give it a name. You can call it special time like it's designed. I've also had parents call it like your child's name and mom time. Let your child know when it's special time. So we're going to distinguish it from the other times of the day that you're spending with your kids. And then the idea is to allow your child to pick the activity. So remember, we're trying to fill their bucket for agency and control in an age appropriate way. So they get to pick what you guys do during the 5 or 10 minutes. One way to have sort of your own control over this is to set out maybe 2 or 3 of their favorite toys and let them pick from that group. And then you just play. You play with your child, you be 100% present. It can be helpful to put away phones or work, other electronics and distractions, and just put your spotlight on your child during those 5 and 10 minutes. You'll follow their lead, meaning you'll say what they say, you'll do what they do. And then try to avoid placing any demands on your child during these 5 to 10 minutes, such as asking questions or giving instructions. So remember, we really want them to take the wheel. And then as the adult, we want to be the follower or the passenger. Let's talk about things to do during the 5 to 10 minute period of special time. The key is to give lots and lots of positive attention to positive behaviors, right? So we're going to talk about each of these skills, but the idea behind this is when kids feel good, they're going to be more likely to be good and to be on their best behavior and to be cooperative. We can start to change the day-to-day power struggles and interaction patterns with just 5 minutes a day. What we're going to do is retune our brains to be on the lookout to try to notice more positive behaviors. These positive behaviors are likely to go unnoticed. I know it sounds easy, like pay attention and focus on positive behaviors, but these behaviors can be quieter. They might be things like your child sitting quietly next to you. When kids are doing what's expected, we don't always feel the need to react. So kids aren't always getting as much feedback as would be helpful when they're doing the right thing. There are certain things we can do and say to give kids the feedback that they're doing a good job. So we'll go through those.
Amy, we've got just a couple of comments
in
the chat. So Meredith just wanted to share that she just started doing the 10-minute special. They call it mommy daughter time.
Yay!
with her 5-year-old, and that she loves it.
Awesome.
And then Catherine had a question. She said she started this too with her 4.5-year-old son. He loves it, but struggles picking an activity and often wants her to pick it. Does that reduce the effectiveness?
That's a great question. So the goal is for special time not to be a point of like contention, right? If it's easier for you to pick, and if you find that you pick it and he goes along with it, I would say that would work just fine, right? If you're picking and you find that then it's like, no, I don't really want to do that. And you find yourself in a power struggle, I would not recommend the picking, because then it's almost like opening up the door for special time to be not so special anymore. So maybe something that might be helpful when I work with parents, I have them pre-select toys that they love. So set out 2 or 3 things in the area, and then you could preface it like, it's special time now. You can pick any of these, and then see if they choose. If they don't, if your child doesn't choose, it might be helpful, especially if you know that they love those toys. Might be helpful if you just sit down and get started. You might find that your child joins in. Does that help?
Yes, thank you so much.
Awesome. Cool. I love this. I love that you guys are familiar with special time already. Okay, let's talk about the first thing to do is praise. So this idea is to catch your child being good. Meaning instead of giving lots of attention to negative behaviors or reacting to negative behaviors, we really want to react and give feedback for positive behaviors. So praise the behavior you like as it's happening and before the challenging behavior shows up. So I just use the example of like sitting next to you playing nicely. That's something that's not always immediately noticed, but you might catch your child sitting quietly next to you or sitting and playing nicely next to you. And if you like that, it's important to let them know. This praise works best when it's used immediately after or during the behavior. So we're shifting our reaction away from a misbehavior. We're going to be proactive and notice the more appropriate behaviors or behaviors you want to see more of. It sounds very simple, but when you use this intentionally, it can be very powerful to quickly increase behaviors you want to see. Sometimes even immediately. So I love to share this example that happens in a session. I was working with a little girl who was 4, and she tends to play. Sometimes she plays very roughly with the toys. But there was a moment where she started to like bang on the door. It was a kitchen playset, and she started to knock. And as you can probably guess, this could have gone somewhere. Like it could have escalated a lot more quickly than it did, because what the parent did was say, "Thank you for knocking gently." And in the moment, she then started knocking even more quietly. So she got that immediate feedback. And then instead of getting excited and knocking on the door as she normally would, she internalized like, "Oh, mom noticed I did something good. I'm going to knock even more gently." Right. And so you're shaping that behavior in the moment.
I mean, I think about it almost like a performance review in a job, right? Like, I mean, as adults, like, how do we know, like in our work, maybe that we're hitting the mark, that we're doing a good job, that we're on the right track? It's like people give us feedback and they tell us, like, yeah, you did a great job on that presentation, or I really liked, what you did with that report. And it's something we don't like think about with children. Like they should just somehow know, right?
Yeah.
Like what they're supposed to do. And it's so easy, like you said, to just fall into the always saying what not to do. But then it's like, well, what am I supposed to do instead? Like,
right. Yeah. And kids don't always know, especially at this early age, right? Like no, don't do that with the toys. Yeah. They're like, well, what should I do?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Always say what to do. It's more effective to say what to do than what not to do. So these are just different ways. I've worked with parents who are like, my praise feels so repetitive. So I wanted to give you these scripts here. There are different ways you can praise. It doesn't always have to be good job, right? There are different ways that you can preface it. It can even be nonverbal. So like a gentle pat on the back. We're making a connection with them. You can give them a high five. And then just these different ways to start off a praise-based feedback. So pro tip for praise. Again, like praise sounds easy. It sounds very simple. It's probably something you're already doing a lot of, right? I'm not putting this here to say that you don't praise, but I wanted to give you a pro tip that the timing of the praise we do matters a lot. So earlier I had mentioned praise before the challenging behavior happens, right? We talked a little bit about the knocking on the door example. We praised her immediately for knocking gently, and we kept her doing more of that instead of escalating. So instead of something like, "No, stay here, stop running," it's important you can say, "Thank you for sitting here next to me." And that's going to keep your child sitting there for a little bit longer. Instead of like, "Wait, don't dump the toys out," you could give them feedback like, "I love how you're looking through the bin. Good job taking out one toy at a time." So the more specific, the better. Instead of like, stop, I put these blanks here because we could even practice together here. Instead of "Stop yelling, that's way too loud," what's something we could say? What's a praise we could give?
"Thank you for talking quietly."
Exactly. That's exactly, yeah. "Thank you for talking quietly." I had a parent the other day say, "Thanks for using your indoor voice," or, "Thank you for telling me nicely so that I could understand." That one was like giving them a reason can be very helpful. So we want to give lots and lots of praise for that before it gets too loud. Instead of "Don't get frustrated," what's something we could say?
I think with this one, I would probably kind of turn it around to say, like, acknowledge what I'm seeing. Like, I see you're getting frustrated. That must be hard.
I like that validation. "I see you're getting frustrated." Then maybe pair it with a praise like, "Thanks for trying. You're still trying. I love how you're still trying." And we build that persistence there. And then for like, "Stop handling the toys like that. We need to be respectful." while they're playing nicely, let them know like, oh, you were putting the blocks together very gently. I like how you're playing nicely with your toys, before it gets to the point of like shuffling around. So the timing matters.
I like that. I see your still trying strategy, because whenever I mention the word frustration to my son, it invariably escalates. So if I said, I see you're getting frustrated, I can see it going south fast. So thank you for that tip.
Yeah. That sometimes happens, right? I think validation works in certain situations, but not always. Not all kids like it, and not in every situation. But like calling attention to what they're doing, right, before they're on like full on meltdown mode. If they're
Right.
still trying, call lots of attention to that, because that will help them try, continue to try. And you're giving them feedback that persistence is something that's, good to work on and good to build.
Catherine, my kiddo hated that too. he did not like that. I mean, it is like Amy said, it works for that sportscasting of like emotions works for some kids, and other kids, like they know how they're feeling. They don't need you to.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, it didn't work. He didn't like it either. But then yes. So, and that's so
Thank you.
funny, because the first thing I said was like, I see you're getting frustrated. And I'm still trying to do that to him, and he's 13. And he's like, yeah, obviously. So yeah, it's just because we want someone to say it to us.
Right. Totally.
And it can be helpful in some situations, right? I think like knowing that mom understands can also be powerful, even if they're not saying like, oh, thank you for understanding. And this one we already talked about, right? Like the validating, the reflecting. It tends to work better for younger kids than older kids, but validating can help them feel heard and respected in the moment. So this is, we just had really great examples about this, but in special time as they're playing, like your child might say something like, I drew a tree. The idea is just to repeat, you did draw a tree. I see your tree, right? And that tells them that I hear you, I'm watching, your ideas are good. It shows that you approve. We can really build their self-esteem this way. I'm going a little bit quickly because I realize I'm looking at the time and I still have some slides I want to cover. So this is my hands down most favorite one. I took this straight from the Parent-Child Interaction Therapy book. And so I wanted to credit Cheryl McNeil here, but describing what you see is like pretty much being a sports announcer. The picture on the left here is a child drawing without much feedback, not getting a lot of descriptions from the parent, or not getting a lot of attention from the parent. The one on the right is with a parent describing. So describing pretty much is just like saying what you see. I see you're coloring the branches. We're not putting a qualitative aspect on it, meaning we're not telling them they did a good job. We're just telling them, I see you. I see that you're trying to stay in the lines. You're grabbing a new piece of paper. So this is just describing their actions. What we're communicating to kids here is that my attention is 100% here right now on you. If possible, during the 5 to 10 minute special time, we really want to ignore minor misbehaviors. So remember, we're focusing on the positive, and then we want to remove attention for minor negative behaviors. But instead, we're not ignoring our kids, right? We're not ignoring the child. We still want to be on the lookout for something to comment on. So there are just some examples here. Like, let's say your child starts to play roughly with the toys. Avoid telling them to stop playing roughly during this special time. We want to give attention for positive behavior. So instead of telling them to stop playing roughly, we're just going to wait until they play carefully again and praise right away. I love how you're playing gently. Good job driving the car carefully on the track. And then give lots of positive attention anytime you see gentle handling and playing with the toys. Another really common example is like, let's say your child gets up and starts running around the room or rolling around on the floor. We really want to remove our attention to that. So instead of telling them to stop, because what might happen if you tell them to stop or tell them to come back and play with you, it's likely going to backfire. They're probably going to roll around even more. And so the idea is to try not to call attention to it. Instead, you might just turn and start to play with the toys on your own. Then if your child comes back, you'll praise. Thanks for coming back to play with me. You're watching me build my house. Thanks for handing me a piece. Do you want to comment on the rejoining? So we just talked about this tantrum prevention strategy is key. It's really the first step to reducing tantrums in the long run. What happens when we focus on tantrum prevention is we can reduce the frequency and the intensity of tantrums overall. so that the ones that then do happen are less frequent. They might happen less often. And then when they do happen, they will be more manageable for both you and your child. So using these strategies, we're being proactive instead of reactive. We're meeting, again, like we talked about, we're meeting the child's primary need for connection with you and control in an age-appropriate way. We can really teach and facilitate emotional growth and development during these special time periods when kids are the most receptive. So when their buckets are full, they will be more receptive to your feedback and likely even your directions. We think of special time like a planned date instead of spending passive time together. So yes, you're spending a lot of time with your kids already, maybe even more in these past 2 years than ever before, depending on how old your kids are. And that time is important too. The passive time you spend doing things with your kids, the routines that you're doing, the books at bedtime, those are all important. But special time is unique in lots of different ways that we just talked about in terms of filling our kids' buckets and their needs. So these 5 minutes a day can go a long way to really increasing the warmth, improving your parent-child relationship, and also improving their behavior. Just a quick thought on when to ask for more help. So these are very general strategies and general information that I'm hoping will help, but it's also important to know when more help might be needed. So some things to think about and to guide you as you're wondering, like, is this really normal kid stuff, or might it be time to seek help from a professional? We tend to think of 4 different components. So we're thinking about how often tantrums are happening or challenging behaviors are happening, how long are they lasting, intensity, meaning like how severe are the behaviors, and then the context matters too. Is it happening at home with certain people? Is it also carrying over into school? Things like that. And then I just put some questions here to consider, like if the challenging behaviors are interfering with your daily life or your social or family life, that might be getting professional help might be something to think about. Are the behaviors intense to the point that they're uncontrollable or violent? How long does it take for a child to return to calmness? And then your child the best, honestly, like, if there are changes in mood that seem out of character, you will know, like, trust your gut. I also just wanted to share if you want to learn more or if you want to practice, I'm holding another workshop on February 25th. So I'm doing another skills-based workshop with another certified PCIT therapist. We're going to continue to practice a lot of the tools that we talked about today. There will be other tools and strategies that we address. And then our goal during that workshop is to really help you individualize it to your home situation. So we'll do lots of different exercises. There's a workbook involved. If you want more opportunities to learn, reach out to me. Feel free to email me and I can help get you set up. Questions, comments, thoughts?
We've got lots of time for questions, everybody. So you can throw them in the chat or just unmute.
Yeah. If not, that's also okay. I know I threw a lot of information your way. I'm hoping it was helpful and hoping to get, I'm hoping that it'll be a good start to your ongoing work.
What's the best way to handle a tantrum when they're getting into something they're not supposed to be doing? And our first inkling is always to say no, but like, how do we redirect in the best way into kind of like, because we'll tell her no about something and she immediately gets into a tantrum. So how do we best handle that a different way?
Mm-hmm. What can you give me an example of like what she's getting into?
Oh gosh, well, it's stuff that we probably should be putting up, right? But for example, we have an outlet cover that like is a little loose, and so she constantly tries to get it off. And so we need to get it fixed. But like in the meantime, every time she grabs, we're like, no, go away. Like, we try to say like, we want to keep your hands safe. Like that's not a safe thing to do.
Yeah, I do think like that is definitely the reason I was asking is because safety issues need to be handled a different way, right? So it's not like we have all this time to like use, these different skills that we talked about. I do think like you need to intervene and let her know, I think you're doing the right thing by saying, oh, that's not safe. You can redirect at that point. Maybe I'm sure you've already tried offering her like 2 things to choose from and then helping her get engaged with it. I think that can be important, right? Because sometimes we expect them to choose and then they go off on their own. But remember that your attention is extremely powerful. It might be even more powerful than the little outlet thing. And so if you can give her, spend a little bit of time like engaging her with that new activity, it might be enough to just, redirect her away from what's not safe.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
But yeah, of course, it's definitely a swoop and like bring her over here situation though. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's hard, right, Becky, with some of those things that like we know, it's the setting them up for success, right? You know that it's a problem that you need to like fix.
Correct.
But in the meantime, like we can't always have everything be exactly the way we want it, right? So it's like that weird balance of like, okay, like I know this is a problem, but like I'm just not in a place where like we can address that yet. So yeah,
Right.
to Amy's
Yeah.
point, it's just, especially with those health and safety things, it's like, there's just no, those are the hard lines.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. I usually tell parents, like, if it's a safety thing, like save no and stop for like those times, right? We're not saying like never say no and never say stop, but if it's a safety issue, you sort of have to sort of get them to move quickly. So
Okay.
yeah. Good question.
Mhm.
Any other questions or thoughts? It's definitely a good starting point. I would start here if there, are still things that come up after you try special time for a bit. I'm always here. I always tell people like, I'm happy to help, whether you work with me or not. I want to point you in the right direction. So know that I'm a resource here in the community. I'm very active on Instagram, so you can follow me or you can email me and just reach out and let me know what's been going on, and we'll try to get you what you need.
Catherine, I noticed you unmuted. Did you have something?
Well, yeah, I was thinking I didn't want to create like a longer event here
No,
unnecessarily.
go ahead. We've got time.
Okay. So my son's 4.5. We're dealing with tone, as you can imagine. I was wondering if you see just as much success with basically praising kind talk or nice talk or whatever you want to call it, rather than really focusing on how we don't want to sound. It just seems sometimes he just gets into a day really where it just seems like the way he's speaking is just not kind, and it creates problems with friends and family. And so I'm wondering if that kind of positive feedback is helpful in that aspect, or if there's other tips or tricks you have for that.
Yeah, I do. I think yes, that's the short answer. So
Okay.
I love from another parent. I don't want to take credit for this, but I had a parent this week that told their child, like, thanks for telling me nicely so I could understand. I
Right.
loved that so much, right? Because it gives them the reason. So I do think praising the moments that they are using respectful words or that they are telling you nicely, I think those are things that can increase that kind of tone and, that the appropriate tone in the long run. Something else to mention is like, is something going on during the times that like you notice a shift in tone? Because it's likely, like, often it's a slow buildup where we notice like a little bit of a whining and then it gets a little bit worse and then it becomes like yelling, right? And so
Right.
if it's a gradual escalation, I would say, is there a need he's trying to get met during the whining?
Okay.
Period. Because the whining is often, it's a cue to us that like something's not okay. They're starting to get frustrated about something. And what is it in that moment? Can we meet the need in another way rather than stop whining or don't talk to me like that? Can we
Right.
meet that need before it becomes a full on yelling,
Okay.
screaming?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
Makes
a great point, Amy. And I would even say, I mean, I think that I would think to try, if you do, like, there's a real tone there that comes out of nowhere, you can always ask and just
True.
say, hey, buddy, like, wow, that seemed a little harsh or whatever that may be. That's, age appropriate language. Like, what's going on? Are you okay? Is something bothering you? I mean, because, right, again, to Amy's point, like, all that behavior is just, it's communication. So
Right.
with that tone, he's trying to communicate something. He may not know what it is. I mean, really, right?
Right.
But maybe just inquiring and kind of building that connection there, just even the moment, not to say like, hey, I don't like that tone, because we don't.
Right.
But like, just to say, hey, oh, that sounded a little off. Like, is everything okay?
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good one. Like,
Because I
wow,
mean, I
that-
know I hear it come out of myself sometimes with my husband, even like he asks me a simple question and I respond and I like hear my tone and I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
why are you talking to him like that?
Right.
But it's because something's going on, right? That I'm
Mhm.
like processing and I'm just having a hard time.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank
That's
you.
a great point, right? We do that as adults too. So it's
Totally.
important. And yeah.
Also, I love talking about this stuff too, Amy.
Me too. Me too.
It's
This
so
is
great.
tantrums are my favorite topic, which I know sounds so weird to say, but it's because I feel confident like when parents are given the right tools, it can like make such a big difference, right? But nobody teaches this. Like
No.
we don't talk about this. There's not a class that teaches you
Yeah.
how to be a parent or how to handle a tantrum. So but I mean, that's one of my passions is like, if I can get you the tools and if it can make your and your child's life a little bit easier, like then my job is done.
Right. Thank you very much.
Of course. I appreciate you guys being here in a time that is just so chaotic and stressful and busy already. And you took, an hour out of your day to be here with me and to listen to me talk about my favorite topic. So I appreciate it. I thank you guys for coming.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks
Thank
so much,
you.
everybody. And I'll follow up with an email that will have Amy's contact information on there as well for you.
Awesome. Perfect.
Great.
Thank
Have
you.
a great day, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.